Welcome, everybody, to Inside Boxing Daily on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. Inside Boxing Daily is brought to you by BetDSI. You can go to betdsi.eu, use the promo code TGT to get a 100% cashback bonus on your first deposit up to $1,000, or you can go to thegruelingtruth.com, click on the banner at the top of the page for BetDSI. I am your co-host for Inside Boxing Daily, Mike Goodpaster. Right now I want to welcome my co-host, Jeremiah Preisser.
What's up, man? Let's get this thing going.
Nothing, but it's time for the People's Champion, Gennady Golovkin,
to
fight against Steve Rolls for some reason in a 12-round fight. I don't know why, but it's a 12-round fight, so we'll go with it. I think this is a mismatch. I know you told me that you liked Steve Rolls a couple weeks ago. Not that you liked him to win, but you thought he was a decent fighter. But when I look at this, he's been knocked down by guys that were not very good, or I don't think are very good. And I just don't see where he's got much of a shot here.
No, I don't think so either. I mean, there are probably some people who are looking at the odds and they're like, oh, well, we're talking about the same kind of mismatch on paper that you saw with Ruiz. And
no, we're not. It's almost twice the odds of that fight.
What?
It's almost twice the odds of that fight.
Well, see, I keep hearing varying things from people. It's like I saw yesterday that somebody was saying that they saw odds as wide as 20-1 for Ruiz. And here's my point. It doesn't matter. I mean, a lot of people are talking about some of the upsets or, some of the close matches that we, thought wouldn't be, like Ruiz beat Joshua, but then, Pursoon also arguably beat Taylor.
But those are two fighters that we thought might be good, but we weren't really sure. I know Gennady Golovkin's good.
But that's my thing. I'm not nearly as worried with Golovkin as I am about some of the other guys because, first off, he's not a heavyweight. And, all it takes is one punch to change the course of the entire fight. Not only that, he's more proven than a guy like Jarrett Hurd. Do you know what I mean? There's less questions about him.
All right, real quick. On BetDSI, Steve Rolls is plus 1,900, so he's 19-1.
Wow, ouch.
And the over-under is 4.5 rounds, and actually the over is a minus 123, and the under is just a plus 105.
Wow. So, yeah, it seems like he's got a long shot there. But, again, I think those are more justified than any of these other fights we've been seeing so far. I mean, again, Golovkin is more proven. He's pretty much set in stone. Rolls seems to have a little bit of power. His combinations are pretty good. I think he's got 2 inches of reach on Golovkin, but I don't think it matters because technically Golovkin is better in terms of gauging distance. He's the superior operator. I mean, even at 37 years old, I'm more confident in his ability to beat Steve Rolls than I am, Joshua's to beat Ruiz or, Hurd to beat, Williams. I mean, it just kind of seems like it is what it is. And we know the way this is going to play out. But for me, it's a matter of whether or not I just want to see if Golovkin and Jonathan Banks want to give it a few rounds to kind of fill it out and try out some new things before they get Canelo Alvarez, or maybe they just want to get him right out of there and not tip any of their hand to Alvarez and his people. I don't know. That's the only thing that I'm kind of going to be watching.
Last week, I think I would end shit as quick as I could.
I would too. Yeah, no, don't let a guy hang around. I mean, it's not as if Rolls can't punch a little bit because he can.
He can?
So, yeah, he can punch a little bit, sure.
Come on. He's 19-0 with 10 knockouts against shit competition.
Well, that doesn't mean he can't punch a little bit.
Well, he's only knocked out half the guys he's fought, and as I said, it's shit competition.
Well, yeah, and I did say a little. I mean, this guy's obviously not Paulie Malignaggi in there, but yeah, I mean, he can punch a little. I mean, but the thing is, still, I mean, you never know with some of these guys. I mean, maybe half of his opponents.
Paulie would be a good puncher if he was a woman, and I think Paulie ought to really consider the transgender thing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if he goes back to the braids and whatnot he had for the Endo rematch. If he just did something like that, but just grew tits, yeah, he might be all right.
Hey, don't say kids. We're on the air. There could be kids listening.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, the thing that stood out to me is I watched him fight Steve Woodall. You ever see that fight? was like 2015, I think it was, and it was for the vacant NABF junior middleweight title. And Woodall had him down on the ground pretty early. And I don't think Woodall's a great puncher or a great fighter, but the thing that stands out to me then is the other thing is Keandre Leatherwood is probably the most notable name I see on here. Unanimous decision. Damian Benelli, 23-2, unanimous decision. He had a TKO over a guy who was 8-4. A split decision win against Damon Nicholson, which if you watch that fight, could have went either way. And Nicholson, I don't think is anything great. He knocked out Attila Koros. He had the TK over Woodall. But my point is this: the better fighters he fought were probably Benelli and Leatherwood, and he didn't dent them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, well, and again, I mean, that's part of the reason why I'm more confident in Golovkin's ability to get rid of him than I am, the other fights that, have been upsets, because Golovkin, again, Rolls has reach on him by 2 inches, but to me, it doesn't matter. I mean, yeah, he has the reach, but in terms of who gets there the quickest, whose is better, whose is quicker, it's Golovkin's. And I think that's why, I think it's a stoppage either way. My only concern is, does he drag it out a little bit? Because he has done that from time to time. I mean, if he perceives that a guy is not a threat, you look at the Willie Monroe fight. And he blasted him in the first round. Seemed like he was willing to drag it out a little bit, play with his food a little bit. And sometimes he doesn't mind letting a guy hang around for a little while until he decides to finish it all. So, again, I'm just wanting to see if they want to try something new. But I will say that Golovkin looks pretty sharp at, 37 years old. He jumped on the scales and he was pretty ripped. Maybe that new personal chef is doing him, I don't want to say wonders, but it's helping a little bit.
Maybe they got some meat from Mexico.
Maybe, right? Yeah, I don't know. But it's funny, Golovkin.
I can't let that die.
No, I don't think he should let it die, because it's not only Canelo who's used that excuse. Again, it's Luis Neary and some of these other guys too. Hell, was it Francisco Vargas too? I can't remember. But yeah, I'm just interested to see how far it goes and whether or not he plays with his food. But he said he's 99% sure that he's getting Alvarez this year.
I think he's getting Alvarez. Money-wise, I think it's going to be Alvarez.
I think it has to be, because if you're looking at it from DAZN's point of view, Golovkin brings in the biggest audience. He brings in more, he brings in probably more subscribers than anybody else. It just generates the biggest revenue. And not only that, you're guaranteed to get at least a good fight. Callum Smith might be a good fight too, but I just think they want to wait that one out just a little bit. And, people are talking about Demetrius Andrade and, guys of that ilk. Andrade doesn't bring anything to the table other than an alphabet trinket. DAZN is worried about money, and they should be. They're trying to build an international brand here. So Andrade just being put on the back burner, and I think that's the right thing to do. Honestly, I could care less about the WBO title and all that nonsense. But I'm looking forward to it after watching Alvarez do just enough to win against Jacobs. I think Golovkin's shot, not necessarily at winning, but certainly going the distance is better than what I thought it was.
I think he's going to win.
You think so?
I think he's going. I just got a feeling from watching that 6-minute. What do they call that thing on DAZN?
40 days.
Yeah, that 6 minutes there got me pumped. But all right, we're going to go ahead and we're going to change topics here because there's nothing else really going on. Nobody cares about Oscar Valdez, and no, he's not a real champion. But there used to be real champions, and who is it? Andrew, what's his last name? Senior, who did a video about the best heavyweight since Muhammad Ali. So we figured we'll talk about that tonight. And I'd say, off the top of my head, the best heavyweights since Muhammad Ali. Of course, you got Larry Holmes, Mike Tyson, Lennox Lewis, Evander Holyfield, Riddick Bowe. These are in no order right now either.
Yes.
The two Klitschkos. Who are we missing?
I think that's where we stop.
I think that's about it.
I think those are the guys.
So when we look at that, who would be your number one guy, young man?
Okay, so the question is, who is the best or who is the greatest?
Who is the best? Well, the best is the greatest since Muhammad Ali. Who was the
Well,
best heavyweight?
well, see, my thing is this: is I distinguish between the two terms of who is the best and who is the greatest. Because my thing is, I think you could say that, well, this fighter was better than another fighter. Uh, like Riddick Bowe and Evander Holyfield, I think is a great example. Actually, I think Bowe was a better heavyweight than Holyfield, but I think Holyfield was a greater heavyweight than Riddick Bowe. Do you see what I mean there?
Let's put it
It's
like
like
this. I know exactly what you mean, but see, I think this. My number one guy is better, and I think he's greater. I think he's
okay.
better, and he's greater than everybody that is on the list of 5 or 6 guys that we just named. Because when I looked at it, the guy that would be at the bottom of that list is Mike Tyson. I would put Tyson below the Klitschko's.
Okay, I think that's fair. I think that
I
is
just
fair.
think the length of them, the way they could punch, and let's face it, you could sit there and say Vlad couldn't take a punch, but Vlad, when he got in his later years, took some punches and got back up and won fights. And the Sam Peter fight stands out to me. He almost did it against Anthony Joshua, which may not mean anything from here on out, but at that
Yeah.
point when Joshua wanted to be a fighter, I think it did matter. So I think I would rank Mike Tyson at the bottom of my 5 or 6 guys that are there.
Yeah, I think that's fair because I know. See, I think some people say, well, Tyson would probably, cream Vladimir Klitschko, and I
Yeah,
would
but
accept.
remember this though, Evander Holyfield. How did he beat him? And Evander Holyfield wasn't near as big as Vladimir, but he'd hit him, and then as soon as Tyson got close, he would grab him. And what the hell is Vladimir the king of?
Yeah, no, I mean, I do understand that, but I also understand that Vladimir wasn't particularly fond of violence. But I mean, I do think it's a good point that, and I think Vladimir is actually starting to get a warmer reception because of it, and partly because of Anthony Joshua's performance against Ruiz. Is that, yeah, he ended up getting stopped early in his career, but a lot. Who did he get beat by? The journeyman guy. Real early in his career. Damn it.
Vladimir?
Tough.
Journeyman?
Yeah,
Sure
Vladimir.
you're not thinking of Ross Purity? Wasn't that a draw?
Yes. No, he got stopped early in his career by Purity.
You sure?
But
I
really,
thought
it was.
a draw.
Yeah.
Ross Purity was a good fighter, though. Nobody will ever know it, but he was.
Well, yeah, well, so the thing about it really is that Vladimir wore himself out more than anything, but I think the fact that he showed, and again, he is getting a warmer reception because of this, but the fact that he showed, like a champion's heart, he got beat up in 2 rounds by Corey Sanders, and then he also gets beat, and suffers a stoppage loss to Lamont Brewster, but he shows. I mean, after the Brewster loss, I mean, he reigns for damn near a decade. I mean, that's pretty impressive stuff. I mean, you can say what you want about his level of competition, but I think in totality, I think it probably should be favored over Mike Tyson's. But yeah, I mean, I think the fact that he got up and became the man and reigned for quite a while is impressive stuff. So I think it's fair to say that, Vladimir and Vitaly are above Tyson. But again, I wouldn't argue with somebody who said
How about
Tyson
this?
would
I would argue
beat
with
up.
it because of this. I think Vladimir beat better. I think Alexander Povetkin in 2013 was better than any of Tyson's wins.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know, man.
I think Ruslan Shagayev, who he stopped, may be a better win.
You think Shagayev beats that Spinks? I mean, I
yeah,
know
that
Spinks
Spinks,
wasn't.
yeah. I mean, that Spinks, I think, was shot by the time you get to 1988.
Okay. Well, and you think Povetkin beats Holmes? That Holmes?
The Holmes of 1988, yeah. The Holmes of 1993, Holmes probably outboxes him. But I think there's a big difference. I think the Holmes of February of 1988 was not prepared. I don't think he had time to get prepared. And also, I think that was a Holmes I think the reason Holmes lost to Spinks was more out of boredom and just the pressure of the 49-0 and everything that went with that. I think Holmes was just burnt out. I mean, from the time I got to talk to him on air and then off air a little bit, it just seemed to me like the Spinks fight, Yeah, actually, not even just the Spinks fight. I think after the Cooney fight, up until he made his comeback in the early 90s, I think he was kind of just fed up with the game.
Yeah, well, and you could be right. I mean, I think you could say that. I don't know. I have a tough time, teasing out the differences between all those guys. And I mean, my thing is, I still think that you could argue that Mike Tyson would beat Vladimir. I
think
do
you
imagine
could
that.
too, but the only thing that I come back to is this. Guys that like to grab and hold and punch, if you punch two, you're going to beat him. If you don't, you just grab and hold, it ends up being Bone Clutcher Smith, and Tyson didn't know how to deal with him either.
You say Bone Clutcher?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that's what he was. He reached out, he grabbed Tyson, he'd hold on to him for dear life, and then actually, in the 12th round, when he threw his only punch of the fight, he hurt Tyson. And see, that's the other thing. I mean, it's hard to judge it because you're actually judging it off a Tyson at his best, which is a young Tyson, and a Klitschko at his best, which is an older Klitschko. They kind of were the opposite of each other, where Tyson started off as this blaze that was hard to contain, and then he kind of fizzled out, where Klitschko kind of busted onto the scene as an all-right fighter. He was just big and really talented, and then he developed into something that was hard to handle.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, and again, I think we're splitting hairs here if we're saying, oh, well, Vladimir Klitschko could potentially outjump.
Hey, let's just call him tied for last or whatever it is.
Okay. I think that's fair.
All right. So when we go to the top of the list, though, I mean, I think there's no doubt that it's Larry Holmes.
Yeah, and I knew you figured it was Larry Holmes. I mean,
It's
it's
Larry
hard to
Holmes
argue
or
otherwise.
Lennox Lewis or Evander Holyfield. To me, it's one of those three.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's between with most people. I mean, when I posted this, I mean the feedback was really just two guys. I mean, it was really Lennox Lewis or Larry Holmes, and I saw some of the arguments on both sides of the aisle, and the Lennox Lewis supporters said, well, he fought the better competition. Maybe at their best he wins that fight. What do you say to that?
What I say to that is this. All right, Lennox Lewis got beat twice by guys that were just a little bit better than journeyman because he took a big shot and couldn't recover from it. Larry Holmes never had that problem. Larry Holmes took a shot from Ernie Shavers that would have knocked out 99.9% of all heavyweights that ever lived. He got up, won the rest of the round, and stopped Shavers a few rounds later. He got lit up by Ronaldo Snipes, who was just a little bit better than a journeyman. And he went down like he was shot. He got up at the count of 7, won the rest of the round, won the rest of the fight, and stopped Snipes. My difference is this. Larry Holmes was tougher. I think Larry Holmes had a great jab, but in the end, Larry Holmes was a dog when it came down to it and it came time to fight. And Larry Holmes did not quit. Hell, if you remember the Tyson fight, I don't think he ended that on the canvas. They had to stop it as he got up. And that was an old Holmes. So my difference is this. I think Ernie Shavers and Ronaldo Snipes, I know Ernie Shavers was a tougher puncher than Oliver McCall or who the hell am I forgetting? Hasim Rockman. Holmes got up. Lennox Lewis got up, and he got stopped. So my difference to me is, in their prime, Larry Holmes was going to do whatever he had to do to win. Lennox Lewis got knocked out a couple times by guys that should not have knocked him out. Larry Holmes, in the prime of his career, which to me would be, 1976 to 1983, 84, lost to nobody. And when he did lose, it was towards the end of his first career, and it was to one of the 5 greatest light heavyweights of all time, who came up, and as you said, styles make fights, and that style for a older Larry Holmes was a bitch for him to deal with. And he lost a close fight the first time. I think he won the second fight. But to me, the difference between Larry Holmes and Lennox Lewis is the exact same thing that happened to Lennox Lewis twice happened to Larry Holmes twice. Larry Holmes got up and won.
Yeah, I find that find it interesting, but I wanted to ask, I mean, do you think I just want to pair them. So if an older Lennox Lewis, right, somebody in just about the same point of his career, if that Lennox Lewis fights that Michael Spinks, the Michael Spinks who beat Larry Holmes, how do you think Spinks does? And if Larry Holmes fights Oliver McCall and
Larry Holmes did fight Oliver McCall, Jeremiah.
right,
and he
right,
was 44 years old and almost won.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously closer to his prime.
Well,
what I'm
closer
asking
to his
is,
prime, I think it's an ass whooping because if at 43 or 44 years old he's losing a close decision, and that's the exact Oliver McCall that had just knocked out Lennox Lewis, correct?
yeah. So I'm also asking about McCall and Rockman. So I want you to pair Rockman and McCall against that Holmes in the same point of his career, and then Michael Spinks.
At which point? In 1985? Because actually, if you're going to compare it to when Lewis lost to him, it would be more of an 81 or 82 Holmes, wouldn't it?
Yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah, I think an 81 or 82 Holmes destroys both of them. I mean, Hasim Rockman could not handle that jab, and Oliver McCall was so nuts, you never know what you're getting from him. He might run out of ring screaming and crying, or he may just run out and just start throwing bombs and hope to get lucky. All I know is this. I think that either way, Larry Holmes took the best shots from guys like Jerry Cooney, Mike Weaver, Ernie Shavers, and didn't go nowhere. Got knocked down once. I think he got knocked down by Weaver. He got stunned by Cooney a few times, but he walked through that. And my problem is, I think the better question is what happens with a prime Larry Holmes against a prime Evander Holyfield. Because to make people that are Lennox Lewis fans even matter, it's not like Lennox Lewis beat a prime Evander Holyfield.
Yeah, no, I know you're right. I mean, it's one thing we've talked about on here before. But of course, people thought that it was a robbery, and I think a lot of people still
think that Lennox Lewis. The second fight was a close-ass fight, though. The first fight, I think there's no doubt that Lennox Lewis won that fight. It's one of the worst decisions I've ever seen. But that was also, the fight was fought, 1999? I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say that if Evander Holyfield at his best would have probably been 1991 and 92.
Yeah.
So we could sit here and say Lewis beat him twice, but you also got to remember, Holyfield was the guy that fought in the 84 Olympics and then turned pro. Lewis fought in the 84 Olympics, stayed in the amateurs, didn't turn pro until after he won gold in 1988. That's not a shot on him. It's just those 4 years, Holyfield was already the champion of the world. I mean, by 1988-89, he's already moved to the heavyweight division. So I'm not blaming Lewis for not fighting him because I don't think it would have been the right timing anyways for those guys to meet in their prime. I just would have loved to see Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis in their prime because I think he would have got a greater fight. I'm not so sure that Lennox Lewis beats Holyfield if they're both in their prime now.
And you said the more important question is that who wins Lennox Lewis versus Larry Holmes at their best? And
no, Evander Holyfield against Larry Holmes.
Oh, okay.
Because this is the other thing. If these guys are going to fight, and this is why it's almost impossible to compare eras, especially even if it's just the early 80s to the early 90s, is this fight a 15-round fight or a 12-round fight? Because I don't know if Lennox Lewis can go 15 rounds at a tough pace. I know Larry Holmes can. I know Evander Holyfield can because Holyfield did it against Dwight Muhammad Qawi in 1986 in his 12th fight. So I think all these things make this impossible to really know. All I know is I watched them all, and I think the heart of Holmes would have beat all of them. But I think him against Lewis and him against Holyfield would have been absolute wars. I think him and Tyson would have been a war until Tyson would have realized Holmes wasn't going anywhere in his prime, and then Tyson would have wilted and broke like he did every time he fought a fighter similar to Larry Holmes.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think a prime Larry Holmes is just a styles nightmare for Mike Tyson. Again, as we've talked about and as plenty of other people have talked about over and over again, it's if you could jab, if you could nullify him, you could tie him up. break his rhythm, I mean, you could outbox him. And Holmes was obviously, I mean, Holmes was better than, Buster Douglas or, some of the other guys that gave him some fits there. So, yeah, I don't think I have any problem at all saying that Larry Holmes beats a prime Mike Tyson. I mean, I don't have a problem with saying he beats any of these guys. I think Holyfield would have been very interesting, especially, one of the Holyfields from the Riddick Bowe fight. To me, when he was at his best, as a heavyweight,
he was at his best. But that's why Riddick Bowe, I think, belongs in this conversation too, because Riddick Bowe.
Well, and
go ahead.
No, and that's kind of why I use the terms to distinguish best and greatest, because I think it's possible that, Bowe might have been the best. Of course, I'm not going to rank him as the greatest because, it really matters what you did. The proof has got to be in the pudding, and he just didn't last but he didn't last as long as these other guys.
Well, he didn't last as long as the other guys because he didn't take care of himself.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. But, I mean, in terms of skills, I mean, there may have been none better. I mean, I'm not a big Riddick Bowe fan, but, I saw how talented he was with my, 2 eyes. And for, to watch a guy that size in fight as well as he did, I mean, to me, it's amazing. I mean, because you look at guys like Lennox Lewis, Vladimir Klitschko, and you even hear some praise going around like, oh, even with Anthony Joshua when it's lost, they're like, oh, well, it's too bad Emmanuel Stewart's not around to teach him the ropes. I mean, dude, I don't want to see Anthony Joshua stay on the outside, jab and grab. I don't want to see that. And I think that's what differentiates Riddick Bowe from just about most of the big guys in history.
I mean, the thing is this, that second Galata, really both Galata fights, but the second Galata fight in particular, he took a massive ass beating. I mean, he was getting hit from the kneecaps to the top of the head for 8 or 9 rounds. And the thing is this. People say, well, he didn't win the fight, Galata got disqualified. But his ability to take that punishment won him the fight, because his ability to take that punishment is what discouraged Galata and sent him over the edge every time, because he beat that man like you could see nobody ever get beat, and Bowe kept coming. And the thing is this. If Bowe would have stayed in shape, I think there's no doubt Bowe would have been the best of all these guys, including Larry Holmes. That's how talented I think Riddick Bowe was. Riddick Bowe, the night he beat Evander Holyfield, I compare it to when I think of Joe Frazier. That March night in 1971, I don't know if there's ever been anybody alive that could have beat that Joe Frazier.
Except the Riddick Bowe beat Evander Holyfield?
No. I don't think there's anybody that could have beat that Joe. That Joe Frazier that night was so, and people forget that he was so fucking quick. I mean, the head movement, his hands, and I mean, that's against Ali, and everybody says Ali was off for 3 years, but Ali had just stopped Jerry Corey. He stopped Oscar Bonavena. I mean, he was pretty damn good that night himself, and Joe Frazier beat him that night.
Yeah, we're talking about one of the fastest heavyweights to ever do it, and he's bobbing and slipping jabs consistently. Yeah. I mean, yeah, sure, he was taking some, sure, but just the rate at which he was able to move his head. I mean, I agree with you, man. He was just so sharp, and he was just so determined. That's what I was especially fond of with Joe Frazier. It's just he was determined. He was out to get you. I mean, yeah, Muhammad Ali would play around a little bit too, but Frazier would take some shots. He'd be like, all right, come on. He'd nod his head and be like, all right, well, this, you got 12 rounds to keep this up, or 10, 15 rounds to keep this up, and he just kept coming at you. But he was so sharp with his hooks. I mean, it's funny because you can always tell when people don't actually watch the fights, and they comment on the highlights that they see of Ali get knocked down in the was that the last round or the 14th round? When he really cracked him with the left hook and dropped him, but Ali got
that was in the 11th round. Ali Frazier won.
Yeah, well, I mean, and when you look at the fight up until then, I mean, Frazier was banging the hell out of it. He's banging his body like a drum, and not only that, he had hurt him seriously before he ever dropped him. I mean, was cracking him with left hooks and everything. I mean, he was cutting off the ring well. Frazier is arguably, I don't want to say arguably, but he is one of my favorite heavyweights of all time. I mean, that was just I think you could say it's the best win any heavyweight has ever had.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, for one specific night, Andrew Ruiz was a top 20 heavyweight of all time. We have a couple questions from Hamed. I want to get to that. That has nothing to do with this, but I think that conversation went pretty well, and I think we're done now. All right, so, because Hamed's questions are interesting. Question number 1 from Hamed. I have seen multiple people branding Anthony Joshua a hype job. What are your thoughts, and do you think, by that logic, Golovkin was a hype job and overrated? Triple G, looking at his resume, it's a very thin one. One of his biggest wins was a welterweight in Kelbrook, and Lemieux, who was exposed as a one-dimensional plotter, Jeremiah.
Well, no, I don't think you can use the same logic because Golovkin wasn't stopped. I mean, Golovkin's the only blotches on his resume are arguable, an arguable draw, which the vast majority of people saw him win, and then a loss, which most people also saw him win. I mean, and we're talking about a guy who's, Joshua is in peak form, and he got knocked out by Andy Ruiz, who's a big underdog. Alvarez Golovkin was seen as much, much closer on the odds. And also Golovkin is on he's on the plus side of, he was 35, 36 when he first fought Canelo Alvarez, who's, been considered a pound-for-pound fighter since, 2012? Something like that, when he beat Erislandy Lara, if I'm not mistaken. I just don't think you could apply the logic to both of them. I mean, I do understand
if he was
the
a
criticism.
Hype job, Canelo would have knocked him out. Jacobs would have knocked him out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't think you could. I mean, you look at what Canelo did to people who were actually levels below with James Kirkland and guys of that ilk. Alvarez is not a huge puncher, but I mean, you could even against a guy like Austin Trout. I mean, Golovkin represented his biggest struggle of his entire career outside of Floyd Mayweather. So I think that says something because Erislandy Lara is obviously a talented boxer. Austin Trout was obviously very good at his best as well. Daniel Jacobs is obviously quite good too. And Golovkin, again, outside of Floyd Mayweather, represented. But I understand what you're saying is that, Golovkin's resume is not particularly deep, but it sucks because, sometimes you sound like you're apologizing for the guy, but it's not really his fault. I mean, yeah, he Lemieux is one of his best wins. Kell Brook, yeah, you could say is one of his best wins. But Daniel Jacobs is his best win, and Daniel Jacobs is a top
You know what?
3.
I think Canelo Alvarez was his best win twice.
Yeah. I mean,
he clearly beat him the first time. He beat him the second time. So I don't see how he could be a hype job. I mean, not like he got knocked out like a fat Mexican.
Well, and here's what I go to. Okay, Golovkin hasn't come even close to being upset by an underdog that large. He had a streak of 23 knockouts.
Yeah.
You see what he did against Andy Ruiz type fighters in his division. But here's my thing: is find me another example in boxing history where an aggressive guy who's considered a big puncher is able to outbox or arguably outbox his top 2 challengers at 34 plus years old. I mean, I'll wait for the examples, but I can't imagine that list is very long.
All right, next up by Hamed. Question number 2. How do guys like Mike Coppinger and Steve Kim become so-called lead writers? One has very little what he's talking about. I think he means one knows very little what he's talking about. I guess he's talking about Coppinger. And the other didn't even get that far in college. Are these writers basically fanboys who call themselves writers, Jeremiah?
No, I don't think so. I mean, honestly, you can't get ahead just being a fanboy. You never make it to a big publication like ESPN simply being a fanboy. And again, I understand the criticism.
Actually, I think you can.
I understand
because Max Kellerman's there.
Well, that's true. But I mean, that's true. But I mean, even as much as it's easy to dislike Max sometimes, I would still rather listen to him than tons of these guys on Twitter. Again, I'm not a big Kellerman fan, but the dude's seen a bunch of fights and he knows what he's talking about. Again, I know. His opinion is off a lot of times. I get it, but this is a guy who sat ringside for a bunch of fights, and he's been analyzing for a long time. But see, with Steve Kim and Mike Coppinger, those guys are writers, and I understand. I understand what you're saying. It's like even guys who are working for big publications or big outlets, somehow they get these paid gigs. And, you're asking yourself, well, if they're doing it, why can't some of these other guys do it? Well, maybe you can. But Mike Coppinger, to his credit, had been writing for The Ring for, a number of years. Steve Kim, he was putting work in all the way back to Doghouse Boxing or Max Boxing. I mean, Steve Kim's been writing about the sport for many, many years now. I think he also runs UCN Live, or he was. The guy, what differentiates a lot of these guys is that they just put the work in. I know they may come across as biased, and Steve Kim, I know he's like Michael Montero's friend and whatnot, and he can be all right sometimes. I do think he says some interesting things, but he just seems to think a little bit highly of himself, and he's constantly
highly of himself.
Steve Kim.
Oh, okay.
And he's patting himself on the back for blocking people a lot of times, and I don't think he's a bad dude, but in boxing, I just think it's easier to get ahead because there's less competition. So, whether you went to college or not, it's not really part of the criteria as to whether or not you write for a big publication. I mean, so long as you know how to write, you put in the work, a lot of times you can get ahead. But I understand what you mean. I mean, these guys, sometimes the bias is coming out of their eyes and it can be annoying. But when you compare them to some of these other guys, I don't think they're that bad.
All right. I don't mind Steve Kim, I guess. I don't know. I really don't pay that much attention to anybody but ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, I
don't really
follow
care what anybody else writes because everybody else is usually, we'll just leave it that most people are paid by certain places, and I'm not saying they are, even though they are. And that doesn't. Yeah. I think Steve Kim and Mike Coppinger. I think there's a lot worse out there, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, all you got to do is go to a big website like Boxing News 24, and you see the general caliber of boxing writers, and it's low. I mean, compared to other sports, like boxing or football. I mean, the kind of stuff you see on big sites is a lower standard than what it is in other places. And Steve Kim can write. He is a good writer, whether or not he went to college or not. I mean, I think that's one of those things you can so long as you practice over and over again, I think you can become a good writer, and especially if you have good tutors, like if you have good editors and whatnot, or guys who are willing to work with you. But yeah, I follow Kim and Coppinger myself on Twitter, but Coppinger I really only follow because he's trying to break news, or he's got some sources or whatnot.
What do you think about Dougie Fisher?
I think Fisher is a good writer too. I mean, I don't think you. Yeah, I do too. I mean, I don't think I've seen Dougie. To me, Steve is more up on his modern boxing, whereas Fisher to me is more well-rounded. I've seen Fisher in some of the conversations on historical boxing, and he knows his stuff. I mean, you couldn't become the editor-in-chief of the Ring magazine not knowing your shit. So I got to give Fisher that. And they both, especially Fisher, he seems to have a pretty mild-mannered demeanor. He's not confrontational. He retweets my stuff. Hell, he retweeted my Kostya Tszyu video, was it yesterday or the day before? He's participated on some of the shows. Hell, he might even be willing to come on this. He was on, the Ringside Reporter. He was on their podcast one time. So he seems like a guy he's not quite like Steve, where he's not really going to thumb his nose at you and act like he's high and mighty. So yeah, I like Dougie. I don't know him on a personal level. It's hard to say. Again, I'm not rubbing any real personal elbows with any of these guys except, Montero. So I don't know them on a personal level. So it's not for me to say completely who these guys are and as people. But Coppinger is okay, and, Kim is okay too. I mean, I've gotten into it with Kim at least once before. But nothing too serious. But yeah, I don't know, man. It's like for their roles, they're okay, but they're nothing special. I mean, they're better writers certainly.
Like who?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of guys over at boxing.com who do a good job. I mean, Mike Casey is one of my favorite writers. He's been, absent for a long time, and I don't know why, but he's just a guy that, paints a lovely picture whenever he's writing. I think Stephen Edwards is not necessarily a great writer, but he's a great boxing mind. I think Lee Groves is a damn good writer. Trying to think of some of these other guys that I've seen. Got a couple guys from Boxing News, and I can't seem to remember their names right now. But yeah, a guy like Mike Casey is one of my favorites. Who else is pretty good? Oh, well, of course, Springs Toledo. I think Springs Toledo is a fantastic writer. Yeah. Toledo to me is up there with the creme de la creme. Same with I think Thomas Hauser as well. So Hauser, Toledo, Casey. Those are some of my favorites.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about tonight?
I mean, it's up to you. But on this day, I did notice it was Morrison versus Foreman. And I guess I will say that because I posted this on Facebook, and for anybody who didn't see it, I found it was funny, and I think you would too. It's that not long ago, so months before the Ruiz fight was even announced, you would see on a lot of these Facebook.
Dude, you still see it about Deontay Wilder whipping Tommy Morrison. I mean, people are freaking stupid. Tommy Morrison would knock out anybody that's fighting today.
Yeah, it's funny, man. It's just funny how perception changes so quickly. It's like, months and months before the fight was even announced, people are like, oh, yeah, Anthony Joshua beat Tommy Morrison. And now all of a sudden Andy Ruiz knocks him out. And I bet if you posted that question again, all of a sudden Morrison is going to be the favorite there. I mean, come on, man. We got to watch what we say with some of these guys because it's, their careers have not played out. And we see what sort of level they're at when they're getting stopped by guys like Andy Ruiz. And again, as we've said before, it's not that I don't like Anthony Joshua. If Deontay Wilder was fighting the same level of competition that Anthony Joshua was, he would have probably already been knocked out before he ever got to Andy Ruiz. So, I don't think that, I just think the perception is all wrong here. Yeah, Wilder's knocking guys out, but he's not really fighting, killer's row. Joshua had the strongest strength of schedule in any of these guys. Yeah, and it got knocked off. So, to say that a guy like – and, I watched some of the Morrison fight today too. I mean, Morrison was throwing way more punches than – these modern guys, watching Anthony Joshua and Andy Ruiz. I mean, Morrison was throwing more than both of them just by himself.
Yeah. And Holmes and Norton is tomorrow or today now or in 13 minutes on this day. That was Holmes Norton. I remember watching that. That was on, and Jimmy Young and Ozzy Ocasio was on the undercard.
How was that fight, by the way? I mean, Young and Ocasio. Oh, no, Ocasio. It doesn't seem like those styles would mesh all that well.
It was a horrible fight, but it was a huge upset. Jimmy Young was a huge favorite, and Young had the close decision loss to Ali in 76, and then in 77, I thought he beat Ken Norton in a fight we played on the Facebook group page last week. And everybody thought he was going to win. He was going to be the guy that would get the shot because the winner was supposed to be the mandatory contender to fight whoever won the Holmes-Norton fight. And, of course, Ozzy Ocasio beat Jimmy Young and ended up getting a title shot against Larry Holmes where he was knocked down like 752 times in 7 rounds.
It's not exaggeration either.
No. It was 752 times or 5 or 6 times. But that's all the same. Once you get knocked down more than 3 times, you got knocked down 756 times.
Yeah, something like that. But isn't that incredible that Jimmy Young arguably beat Ali, Norton, did beat Foreman? It's like, man, this guy might be a great, huh?
Yeah, but I think that the thing that stood out to me was an interview I saw with him before he fought Jerry Cooney. And actually, I think Jerry, and this is the thing that made me think Cooney was actually pretty damn good, was the fact that the Jimmy Young he beat was a pretty good version of Jimmy Young. And Young had been on a winning streak, I think, at that time. and came into the fight, and he gave Cooney a good go if you've ever seen the fight. And Cooney ended up stopping him. There was a horrendous cut right between, I think it was Young's eyes, and he ended up getting stopped there. But the thing I remember was Jimmy Young, after the loss to Ali and the loss to Norton, which were both very controversial, I think that took a lot out of Jimmy Young, because I don't think for most of his career after that, if you look at his record, I think his record ended up like 35-18 or something. But it's a 35-18 that, like, 1983, he's going to distance with Tony Tubbs. I think his last Raw was 1982. He fought and lost a fairly close unanimous decision to Greg Page. But if you look at this, before he fought, he lost the 2 fights to Ocasio, because he lost a rematch to Ocasio, too, in San Juan, Puerto Rico. That was a unanimous decision. The first fight against Young was a split, or against Ocasio was a split decision. Then he stopped Wendell Bailey. But that fight, if I remember, was on the undercard. It might have been the Weaver Holmes. I'm not sure, but it was on the undercard on an HBO show, and he was way out of shape against Wendell Bailey. But he comes back, and he fought a young Michael Dokes. Dokes was like 14-0 at the time, and I think people had kind of written Young off. But he ended up losing a close decision to Dokes, which kind of got him back into flow a little bit. And he came out, and he went to Wembley and beat John L. Gardner, who was a fringe top 10 guy here and there. I think Gardner ended up basically getting that fringe here and here knocked out when I think Michael Dokes starched him in like 81 on the undercard to Snipes and Holmes. It was either Snipes and Holmes or Spinks and Holmes. He beat a dude by the name of Don Halpin, which was no big deal. But then he fought Jerry Cooney, and he lost to Cooney in 4 rounds. But like I said, that was mainly because of a bad cut. And, I mean, that was the fight that made me think Cooney would have a chance against Holmes, which I think he did, but he didn't at the same time, if that makes any sense, because Holmes was greater than anybody thought at that time. And then he came out and he beat Jeff Sims. Jeff Sims was a dangerous guy that could punch. He beat Franco Thomas. And then he had the shot against Greg Page, which could have led to a title shot for him again, but he lost that. And then that basically, he went on a losing streak where I think he lost unanimous decisions to like Philip Brown. That was a split decision loss, I think. And Brown was a guy who got his big shot against Jerry Cooney, and Cooney knocked him out like 1 round in 1984. And then he fought Tony Tubbs and Tony Tucker, both young versions of Tubbs and Tucker, but they both outboxed him and beat him. And really the rest of his career was basically him losing to fighters that never should have even been in a ring with him. Because I remember he lost to a dude by the name of Tim Anderson, who got knocked out like 5 years later by a really old Larry Holmes in like 30 seconds.
Wow.
He ended up his career by beating a guy who was in his pro debut in 1990. But Jimmy Young's a guy that when you look at him and you see the record of 35-18, it doesn't even tell part of the story.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, and that's
you got
what
to remember this. Jimmy Young beat Ron Lyle, too.
Yeah, right. I mean, this is what, dude, how many times have I talked about this on the show? I mean, it's these guys who it's like if you just tweak a decision one way or the other for them, it's like the perception is completely different for them. Yeah. And to be honest with you, Jimmy Young does get a lot of credit, though. He does get a lot of credit from the guys who watched during the time.
From people who
But, you know, he just... Exactly. He does get a lot of credit, and deservedly so. But yeah, a lot of these people, ignore him. I mean, and again, it is easy to kind of put him on the back burner when you look at the guys that he fought, and some of the other fights that they had. There's, I understand why, but yeah, he's like so many other guys in history. It's like if you tweak a decision here or there, all of a sudden.
Well,
they're ranking him
his career because, I mean, I think it took away his heart to do this because if you look, started in 1974, he beat Jose Luis Garcia, who was a Kid Norton victim, who was a guy that was ranked a little bit bottom of the top 10. He fights a draw with Bernie Shavers. In 1975, he beats Ron Lyle. This is Lyle, I think, right before Lyle fought Ali. He then beats Jose King Roman, who had a title shot against George Foreman a few years before. He gets the shot against Ali, loses that decision, but in the meantime, he gets a lot of confidence. After that, he beats up a couple guys with losing records. Then he fights Ron Lyle, beats Ron Lyle by unanimous decision, beats George Foreman by unanimous decision, beats Jody Ballard, who was a decent fighter, but then he gets the Ken Norton shot. I think he got robbed. I thought he beat Norton, and then after that, he's losing to Ozzy Ocasio. And Ozzy Ocasio is a very underrated fighter, but Ozzy Ocasio was a cruiserweight, really. And you look at his fights against Dokes and Page, I mean, he gave Dokes and Page all they can handle.
Yeah. Again, I think you're right. I mean, it's obviously he was a very talented fighter, and it's just unfortunate. Again, it's those are the kind of guys that I find myself rooting for a lot of times. It's like studying these guys. I mean, there's so many close decisions in boxing history, and it's like, well, hell, man, that guy probably deserved. And this is the thing: is it just changes perceptions completely for a lot of guys. It's like, okay,
Triple G, if he gets the first decision against Canelo, Hamed
exactly
doesn't ask that question tonight.
Right, exactly. I mean, who at that point is going to say that Golovkin is overrated when he beats Canelo Alvarez at like 36 years old? I mean, you don't ask that kind of stuff because it doesn't happen. But that's the kind of thing that I'm alluding to, is that all it takes is for an official decision, and we know how bullshit those can be. Look at Pernell Whitaker's career. Look at the career of tons of these guys. And you'll see. I mean, we're talking about Nikolashevsky and how he got some, he got to play out a bullshit foul and get himself a disqualification. Well, the Italian-German guy should have won that, or some of these young fights, or just so many fights in history. Yeah, exactly. Felix Sturm gets it. That's the one I talked about the other night. If Felix Sturm gets
Oscar De La Hoya, his entire career changes.
Right, exactly. And of course, anybody who's actually watching the sport, and this is why I really only like talking boxing with people who actually pay attention, because they understand these things are more nuanced than win, lose, or draw. I mean, I get it, man. It's a lot of people like to, because if you watch another sport, if you watch football or you watch basketball, you watch baseball, there are clear winners. If you watch soccer, I guess there are clear draws, right? But in boxing, it sucks because it's just not that simple a lot of times. I mean, it's just, how many bad decisions have we seen, through the year? I mean, what if Tyson Fury gets the official decision over Deontay Wilder? I mean, are people really asking who the number one heavyweight in the world is? I mean, I suppose you could say Andy Ruiz after the win, but you're not really questioning whether or not. Do you know what I mean? It's like all of a sudden after Deontay Wilder's knockout over Dominic Breazeale, people are still hyping the guy as if he shouldn't have lost against Tyson Fury. But it's over and over again. We see those sort of things, and good fighters get screwed because of it.
Yeah, but what the hell? At least Steve Rolls has a shot on the card tomorrow night. So
yeah, poor Steve.
Yeah, poor Steve Rolls. But all right. So, I don't have anything else, do you?
No, but are we playing a fight on the Facebook page?
What are we playing? At 12 o'clock, we've actually got the 1982 NBA Finals Game 2. Where else are you going to see that but on Facebook? On the Grueling Truth Sports Network. But we will have more fights tomorrow. I don't know. We won't have much tomorrow, but Sunday we'll have a shit ton in the evening.
That's cool.
What you want to see. What do you want to see, Jeremiah? I got Luis Resto.
Oh, man, I don't know.
That Collins kid. Remember that?
Yeah, well, I'm sure people tune into that one. I mean, I'm sure you get a lot of engagement on that one.
And the picture's beautiful on it, too. All you got to do is tell me what you want. Tell me what you want, what you really, really want. How about a little James Tony John Ruiz?
Yeah, there you go.
Harold Johnson versus Marty Marshall?
No.
I got like 10 Teofilo Stevenson fights from the 70s.
Yeah, there you go.
Eddie Macon against Ernie Terrell. Hopkins Trinidad. No. Tony Nunn. I bet you'd like to see Tony Nunn, wouldn't you?
I do like that fight. I like Michael Nunn. I mean, dude, I'm just a fan of these tall, wiry guys because that's the way I am. I'm just tall and skinny like that. And Nunn was one of the best ones I'd ever seen.
How about a
I mean,
little Vitaly
outside
Klitschko
Tom.
against Corey Sanders?
Yeah, no, that's a good fight too.
That'd be a good one. Duran Palomino.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
can run a double feature. We got Duran Palomino, Ken Buchanan versus Carlos Ortiz.
Yeah.
Got a little Jose Napoles. We could run a double header of Jose Napoles. Duran Benitez. Yeah. Holyfield Foreman. I think I already put that up, didn't I? All right.
Yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap the show up, but keep an eye on the Facebook page because we will always be showing you stuff other people can't. All right, guys. We're going to wrap it up. Damn, the Mariners just went up 5-1 on the Angels. That hurts my pocket. All right, but the Raptors won, and that helped it out. So we're going to go ahead, and we're going to wrap the show up. I want to remind everybody, you can hear all of our shows. Well, no, let's check out BetDSI first, and the Retired Boxers Foundation. I think I forgot them at the start tonight. Make sure you check out the Retired Boxers Foundation. Jackie Rich and Alex Ramos do a great job for, of course, retired boxers. Is why they call it the Retired Boxers Foundation. Also, go to BetDSI. BetDSI will give you up to 100% cash back bonus on your first deposit up to $1,000. So if you want to bet the fights tomorrow, if you want to bet the Belmont, which if you want to bet the Belmont, we already gave you the winners tonight on thegruelingtruth.com. Go check out the Belmont Stakes Special. So you can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for Jeremiah Preisser, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.